Have you ever followed the rules that kept you safe, only to realize the rules might not be enough? When a lonely night shifts into something much darker, one man learns the terrifying truth behind the place he works, if he survives the night. What would you do if the very building you were protecting turned against you? It was a cold, lonely night at the mall. The usual hum of distant voices, the bustle of shoppers, the bright lights, all of it was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that had settled over the space. I sat alone in the dimly lit security office, the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds in a way that almost seemed louder than it should be. My fingers drummed lightly against the cold metal desk. I was used to this. I had been working the graveyard shift for almost 6 months now, but tonight felt different. There was something in the air, a heaviness that I couldn't quite shake. The building felt too silent. I glanced around the room, at the monitors that flickered with faint images of the mall's empty halls, the shops with their shutters down, the silent elevators. All I could hear was the hum of the fluorescent lights above me and the occasional shuffle of my own feet. The world outside was sleeping, and I was the lone protector of this vast, empty complex. I couldn't decide if that was a comforting thought or the beginning of a nightmare. I reached for my coffee mug, taking a sip from the now lukewarm drink. It didn't taste great, but it did the job. A few more hours, and my shift would be over, and I could go home to sleep in my own bed. At least that was the plan. The long hours alone had begun to wear on me, but the paycheck at the end of the week made it bearable. A light buzz on the radio cracked through the silence. It was a message from the janitor, Carl. "Just checking in, kid. Everything all right in there?" I sighed and pressed the button on the radio. "Yeah, just the usual. Everything's quiet." There was a brief silence before Carl's voice came through again. "Good. Stay sharp. I'll be done with the restrooms in about 10 minutes. I'll check in before I head out." "Sure thing, Carl. See you soon." As I set the radio back down, I ran a hand through my hair. It was only around 3 a.m., but the isolation had already begun to get to me. It was always like this on the late shifts. Carl was a reliable guy, but it wasn't like we ever really talked much. It was usually just me, the cameras, and the occasional radio check-ins to break up the silence. I glanced at the clock again. 3:15 a.m. The mall was a maze of empty spaces now, corridors and hallways that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. I couldn't help but feel that the building was more than just a place. It was a living thing, something that absorbed the noises of the world and held on to them long after the people had gone. It was then that I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the door. My heart skipped a beat. At first I thought I had imagined it. Surely it was just the wind or something tapping against the building. But the knocks came again, slow, deliberate, and hard. The kind of knock that wouldn't be ignored. I sat up straighter, my body tense. No one should be out here at this hour. The doors were locked, and I hadn't heard anyone walking around in the hallways. I leaned forward, my eyes darting to the surveillance monitors. The hallway outside was still, completely empty. I checked the time again. 3:18 a.m. It had to be Carl, I reasoned. Maybe he forgot something. He often did. He would knock, and I'd let him in. No harm, no foul. But then I remembered the rules. Rule 8. Never open the security office door between 3 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Not for anyone. Not even if you know them. No exceptions. Even if they knock, do not open the door. Check the cameras. I hesitated. I had followed the rules for months now, and nothing had ever happened. But there was something off tonight. My skin crawled as I sat there staring at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. My eyes flicked nervously between the security monitors and the door. I felt a prickle of unease crawling down my spine. Another knock, this one louder than the first. It rattled the door in its frame. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. Maybe it was Carl after all, just trying to get my attention. But, no, Carl had keys. He wouldn't need to knock. The radio crackled again, and Carl's voice came through with an odd, strained edge. "Hey kid, you there?" I pressed the button to reply, my throat dry. "Yeah, I'm here." Carl's voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. "Don't open that door." I froze, the blood draining from my face. What did he mean by that? "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Carl didn't respond immediately. There was a long, heavy pause before his voice came back, low and tense. "You heard the knocks, didn't you?" I nodded, despite knowing he couldn't see me. "Yeah, I heard them. It's probably just you, right?" There was another pause, longer this time, before Carl spoke again, his words slow and deliberate. "It's not me, kid. It's never been me." I felt my breath catch in my chest. The words hung in the air, making everything feel colder. I turned back to the door. The knocking had stopped, but my hand still hovered just inches from the handle. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I stared at the empty hallway through the camera. Still nothing. No one was there. Another silence fell over the room, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that felt too full, as if something were waiting, watching. I wiped my hand across my face, trying to shake the feeling that had begun to settle over me, that growing sense of dread. It was ridiculous. There was no one there. It was just my imagination getting the better of me. But then, the knock came again. This time, it was louder, harder, and almost angry. I could feel the weight of the sound in my chest, as if the door itself were shuddering under the force. I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. What was I supposed to do? The rules, they were there for a reason, right? I couldn't break them. I couldn't risk opening the door. I glanced at the camera feed again, hoping for something, anything that would reassure me. Still no sign of anyone in the hallway. But then, the janitor appeared. I saw him on the screen. He was standing right outside the door. His body was mostly hidden in the shadows, his face partially obscured by the dim lighting of the hallway, but I could still make out the shape of his figure. His expression was strange. He wasn't smiling, not in the way he usually did. His face was twisted into something more grotesque, almost sickening in its oddness. His eyes were wide, but there was no warmth in them, no recognition. Just hollow, empty sockets that seemed to stare right through the camera, directly at me. And then, in a blink, he was gone. I slammed my hand down onto the desk, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? That wasn't Carl. That wasn't the janitor I knew. I checked the clock again. 3:25 a.m. Was I losing my mind? Or was there something else, something far darker, lurking inside these walls? If you're enjoying this eerie tale, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Let them know about the rules that could keep them safe. Or maybe not. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my eyes glued to the empty hallway through the security monitor, waiting for Carl to appear again. But he didn't. The figure I had seen moments before, if it was even Carl, was gone. There was no sign of movement, no flickering of the shadows. The hallway, once filled with a sense of foreboding, was now silent, almost too quiet. My heart was hammering in my chest as I stared at the blank screen. My hands trembled slightly, and I rubbed them together in a futile attempt to steady myself. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was missing something important. I had followed the rules. I hadn't opened the door. So why did I feel like I had made a mistake? I glanced back at the clock. 3:30 a.m. Every second that passed felt like a weight on my shoulders. The sound of the ticking clock had grown louder in my ears, each tick like a countdown to something inevitable. The shadows outside the security office seemed to stretch, creeping along the walls, as though the building itself were slowly closing in on me. I grabbed the radio again, the urge to check in with Carl consuming me. "Carl," I said into the device, my voice shaky. "Carl, are you there? Please respond." There was only static at first, the low hum of the radio filling the silence. I waited, holding my breath. Carl had never been this unresponsive before. Normally, he would answer almost immediately, even if it was just a short, casual reply. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Carl's voice crackled through, strained and distant. "Kid, listen to me. I don't know what you saw, but it's not me. You need to get out of there. It's not safe." I froze, my stomach dropping. "What do you mean, Carl? What's going on?" There was another pause before Carl spoke again, his words slow, deliberate. "You've been watched by something else. It's in the building, and it's been waiting for you to make a mistake." I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. Watched? But how? The building had been empty. No one had come in or out since the last shoppers had left hours ago. There was no way for anyone to be here, let alone to have been watching me. What are you talking about?" I stammered, gripping the edge of the desk, as if it could anchor me to reality. "This is crazy. Who would be in here?" Carl's voice came back, quieter now, almost a whisper. "You won't see it at first, but it's always been there, hiding, waiting. You're not alone." The line went dead. The radio emitted nothing but static. My hand was still gripping it, as though I could somehow reach Carl through the noise, but it was futile. He was gone. I released a shaky breath, staring at the screen once again. Nothing. No movement. No sign of life. The silence had returned, but it felt oppressive now, thick with something I couldn't name. I thought I heard a faint sound, footsteps, echoing in the distance, but I quickly dismissed it as my imagination running wild. I turned my attention back to the hallway camera. My mind was racing, trying to process what Carl had said, trying to make sense of the growing terror I felt in my chest. Was it possible? Could there really be something in the building? Something that had been there all along? The lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced unnaturally across the walls. I jumped at the sound, the sudden shift in the atmosphere sending my heart into overdrive. The lights had never done that before. It wasn't the wind. There was no way the electrical system would malfunction at this hour. Suddenly, one of the cameras went out. I blinked at the screen in disbelief. The footage had frozen, the image of the empty hallway now completely still. But something wasn't right. The black screen seemed off. It was like there was a shape in the shadows, something that hadn't been there before. I quickly switched to another camera, praying to see something normal, something that could ground me in reality. But what I saw made my blood run cold. At the far end of the hallway, just out of the reach of the dim light, stood a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its shape was distorted, almost flickering in and out of focus. At first I thought it was just a glitch in the camera, but as I stared, the figure remained, its features too blurry to make out clearly, but its presence unmistakable. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of the security office, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't look away. I had to know what it was. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, as though it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. It felt as though the entire mall was holding its breath, as if even the walls were waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, plunging the hallway into darkness. I scrambled to adjust the camera settings, but the screen remained black. The silence was deafening. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right. The sense of dread was almost suffocating now, like I was being pulled into something far darker than I could comprehend. The radio crackled again, this time with a voice I didn't recognize. "You shouldn't have stayed. You shouldn't have looked." The voice was low, guttural, as though it was coming from somewhere deep underground. It sent a shiver down my spine. I barely had time to react before the knock came again. This time, it wasn't a soft, hesitant knock. It was loud, violent, like a pounding fist against the door. I felt the reverberations in my chest, as if the very building itself was shaking with the force of it. My heart was racing now, my pulse deafening in my ears. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Every part of me was telling me to run, to leave, but I was frozen in place, staring at the door. Then, the door handle turned. What do you think is behind the door? Leave a comment below with your thoughts or theories on what's happening to our protagonist. Could this be the end of their nightmare, or the beginning of something much worse? I stood frozen as the door handle turned, the soft, insistent twist of metal grinding against the lock filling the room with a sickening dread. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape this nightmare, but my feet refused to move. It felt as though time itself had slowed, each second stretching into an eternity as I watched the door handle turn once more. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. My heart thudded in my chest, the heavy rhythm of it reverberating through my entire body. My hands, clammy with sweat, tightened around the edge of the desk. I had to make a decision. I couldn't just sit here, waiting for whatever was on the other side to make its move. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to steady the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. Stay calm. That was rule number 1, wasn't it? Stay calm, no matter what. I could hear Carl's voice echoing in my mind, a faint reminder of the rules he had drilled into me. But the rules had been wrong before. Carl had been wrong before. I couldn't trust any of this. The lights above flickered again, casting strange, contorted shadows across the room. My gaze darted from the door to the security monitors. I could still see the figure on the camera, standing motionless in the hall, its presence growing heavier by the second. It hadn't moved, but it felt different, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. The cold sweat trickled down my spine as I slowly reached for the radio. "Carl?" I whispered into the device, my voice barely audible. "Carl, where are you?" Static. Only static answered me, louder now, more intense. The kind of static that felt like a physical presence, vibrating through the air. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the hallway, followed by a scraping sound, as if something had been dragged across the floor. I jumped back in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was unnervingly close, too close. I checked the camera feed again. The hallway was empty. The knocking returned, louder this time, as though something was slamming its fists against the door, desperate to break through. I could hear the metal rattling beneath the force of it. Each bang seemed to shake the very foundation of the room, and my body tensed in fear. Then, a voice, low and twisted, filled the air. It came from right outside the door. The voice was not Carl's. It wasn't even human. It was something else. "Let me in," the voice hissed. "You can't hide from me forever." I recoiled, my blood running cold. My mind screamed at me to get up, to do something, but my legs were paralyzed. I had broken so many rules already. What was one more? But the voice, it sounded like it knew me. It knew my deepest fears. The door handle turned again, more forcefully this time. The metal creaked under the pressure. The knocking stopped, but the sound of something breathing, something heavy, labored, filled the air. I pressed my back against the desk, my eyes wide with terror. I couldn't let it in. I wouldn't. I glanced at the clock. 4:50 a.m. The end of my shift was so close, only 10 minutes. But the longer I waited, the more I felt the walls closing in around me. There was no way out, no escape. The building had become a prison, and whatever had been stalking me wasn't going to let me leave. Then, the door opened. Not fully, but enough. Just a crack, enough to see a sliver of darkness beyond it. I could see nothing but the blackness outside, as though the world beyond the door had been swallowed by it. No hallway, no lights, just a void. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't comprehend it, what I was seeing, what was happening. The door had opened, but there was nothing there. Nothing but that void. I had to get out, now. I stood up quickly, my legs weak from sitting for so long, but the panic propelled me forward. I turned to leave, my mind set on running for the exit, but something caught my eye. The figure from the camera, the one I had seen standing in the hallway earlier, was back. It wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was in the doorway. It was standing right there, watching me. Its eyes were voids, black pits, and its face was a twisted mockery of a human. I could feel my heart stop in my chest. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, impossibly long. Its breath was foul, rancid, and it hissed in a language I couldn't understand. "Stay with me," it whispered, its voice seeping into my very soul. "You belong here now." I screamed, my mind overwhelmed with terror. This wasn't real. None of it was real. The rules, the warnings, none of it mattered now. I turned and ran, crashing through the door, not looking back. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, echoing through the halls, but I couldn't bring myself to look. The only thing I could think of was escape. The exit was just ahead. The doors were wide open, the cold night air beckoning me like a lifeline. I pushed through the door, stumbling into the parking lot, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I didn't stop until I was driving far away from that place, the lights of the mall fading in the distance, swallowed by the dark. I thought I was free. I thought it was over. But then, the radio crackled again, static filling the air. "Don't think you can escape. You'll never leave." The voice was Carl's, but it wasn't Carl. It was something else. And I knew then that whatever was in that mall was still with me, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape it. Not then. Not ever. If you enjoyed this nightmare, don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Narratives for more chilling stories, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest tales. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.